Hi everyone, happy Black History Month, and welcome to my Hellman Talk Real Estate Development Education channel. My name is Professor Marsha B, and this lesson is lesson 1 in my ongoing series studying real estate development, land use, and the process of securing and maintaining real estate in the U.S. Our first lesson is going to kick off the first section of these studies, which is the history of colonization and how treaties, enforced relocation, and outright genocide were used to secure land. Now, this educational series is an overview of an entire field of study on real estate and land use. It's designed not to make you a historical or field expert. It's just to provide you with a foundation of knowledge in this subject matter that lets you understand the U.S. real estate um, market and start navigating it with enough savvy to generate revenue for yourself and your family. Now, for structuring, all full videos will be posted on YouTube. Content on TikTok will be shorter since, that's the nature of the beast. And it will also go on RedNote. And on a side note, I cannot stress enough how good of an idea it is for you to all sign up for RedNote. The community there is beautiful. And I'm telling you, you're going to get so much more knowledge and insight into another part of the world that you probably have never had before. You're truly missing out if you aren't signed up for it. Just FYI. So when you find me on any of these channels, please like and share, of course. And for YouTube, a like and a subscribe is always appreciated. Also, feel free to post comments containing questions or any requests on topics you're hoping I cover within the context of real estate, just so we're clear. Now, I announced this series at the start of February thinking I'd post content providing historical reference to real estate and the Black experience in celebration of Black History Month, but three things got in the way of those plans. First, I readily admit it, I 100% underestimated the learning curve of creating content and editing it, especially for three different social media systems. And two, it simply took me this long to compress research on the subject matter in a way that was usable to as many people as possible. Third, and most importantly, land theft in the formation of the U.S. did not begin with Black people. I would be doing a major disservice to the truth, which I'm sure many of us already know happens a lot in the retelling of history, if I left out the centuries of massacres and broken treaties and outright theft inflicted initially on the First Nations that really did lead to all the other acts of theft. And I'm sure you are all just as sick of folks doing that as I am. So we're covering that before we get into anything else. And then we will be on an ongoing basis referencing both Indigenous and African American land use history, along with everything else far beyond February and on an ongoing basis to make up for it. All right, let's begin. Let's start at the beginning, or the beginning, or as close to the beginning as we're able to at this present time. Native Americans, referred to as Paleo-Indians during the migration era that occurred at least 23,000 to up to 30,000 years ago. They originally migrated from Asia, or more specifically Siberia/Eurasia, to both North and South America via a land bridge that used to exist between the continents called Beringia, or is also referred to as Bering Land Bridge. According to Wikipedia, Beringia existed at this time as a 1,000 kilometer or 620-mile wide connection between Alaska in North America and eastern Siberia. The ancient Native American lineage was an East Asian and ancient North Eurasian mix who developed in North America as Paleolithic hunter-gatherers, otherwise again known as Paleo-Indians. So for more information on that, you can visit my sources at Wikipedia and also ScienceDirect.com. The direct link for Science Direct document that I used for this research is right there at the bottom of the screen. So you can just pause to read. By the time Europeans arrived on the continent, there are estimated to have been about anywhere between 44 to 78 million people, within about 600 tribes already here, spread across about 2.3 billion acres of land. This map is from Native Land Digital, and it gives you an idea of the tribes that were present in North America for thousands of years prior to colonization. There are a huge number of Native American maps I came across, and I personally prefer the ones that don't exclude Mexico and Canada, and also don't have the 50 states outlined. The reason for this is prior to colonization, it's understood that Native Americans had no concept of land ownership. Rather, their mentality towards land was one of interacting with a living, sentient being. Therefore, no one can claim ownership. And the source to that is worldhistory.org. Therefore, rather than owning land, one lived with the land, respecting it, and operating in symbiosis with every other living creature on it. In stark contrast, European colonizers tended to consider everything in existence to have been put here by God for their use and benefit. Domination, rule, and ownership was their worldview, and the Catholic Church even conveniently developed the concept of the doctrine of discovery in 1493, deciding that any non-Christian people couldn't own land. Therefore, Christians were fully justified in taking over their lands, quote, in the interest of saving their souls. Manifest destiny was also a concept created by Europeans. However, this concept was not necessarily originally meant to justify the land theft that was taking place in the Americas, but over time it became twisted into a form of propaganda that European Americans proceeded to use as they pushed their way across the continent. Three aspects of it, the concept, that is, are the assumed unique moral virtue of the United States, the belief that Americans would redeem the world by the spread of Republican government, which is also notoriously known as the American way of life, and the belief that those colonizing the land were ordained and chosen by God to do so, and were therefore deserving of success. Here is an interactive map chronology that you can find on Wikipedia as well as showing the timeline by which each state was added to the Union. And you can see how a map like this presents as if it's simply a matter of adding each state as the government accepted it. But my next timeline is going to show how this process was so much messier, ruthless, and vicious than the map alone would lead you to believe. This is the chronology of the occupation and land theft that took place leading to the creation of the 50 states. There's so much information on each colony and each treaty and each battle and war that it's impossible for me to cover every single one. So if as you go through this, there's a specific one you'd like me to go into deeper detail about in another video, let me know, and you can just post it in the comments and I'll see what I can do. But for the most part, this is where you become the student and you're all really going to have to do your own research individually here. There is the timeline on the left uh, that utilizes such terms as territory expansion and colonial settlements to describe what took place between this time period and Reconstruction. And then on the right is the chronology of what I consider to be a more honest language and description surrounding the activities of the British, French, and Spanish colonizers. When Christopher Columbus arrived on the island of Guanahani, he proceeded to rename it San Salvador, and according to History.com, immediately proceeded to, quote, order 6 of the natives to be seized. The language used in multiple locations referred to them as servants. Uh, he was using them as servants. So I guess that's why they did that. But it's obvious that the more accurate term would be to refer to them as slaves, because he enslaved them. That's actually what he really did. And in 1585, on the east coast of the US, the Roanoke colony was formed. But by 1590, that entire colony had vanished without a trace. There are no records that I've been able to locate that gave any information on what might have happened to them. A permanent colony did not start in that region until 1607 with the Virginia colony. As you can see, when you compare one side to the other, their arrival coincided with multiple wars, kidnappings, and even a massacre of colonizers by a list of allied Native American tribes that were there at the time. So you can see the side-by-side comparison through the years, and you can see how the activities of the colonizers led to each war and battle. However, there was definitely collaboration between Native Americans and the colonizers on a consistent basis through history, and one of those allyships took place during the French and Indian War, which was fought in North America, but it was fought between the French and the British, along with indigenous allies. I can imagine the name of the war being misleading because it definitely misled me. I know I misunderstood it when I first came across the name. Um, in my opinion, a less misleading name for it would be the 7 Years' War, which is the other name for what was essentially the same conflict. Then there's the Battle of Bloody Run, which was in the midst of an actual war between the Odawa and other tribes and the British in the region of modern-day Detroit, Michigan. Their leader, Pontiac, had led a war against the British in that region starting in 1763. Starting in 1774, as you can see, the colonists have begun taking steps to emancipate themselves from British rule, starting with the Articles of Association that initiated their boycotting of British goods and declaring their desire for economic independence from Britain. That led to the Declaration of Independence and the War of Independence starting in 1775. After the war, the now United States continued to expand into Native American territory, claiming it as their own, utilizing the use of treaties that they only held up their end of the bargain on until they decided doing so kept them from the new territory they wanted. So treaties were often broken, and Native Americans were often on the receiving end of violent removal from the very land they agreed to live in because of that treaty. By 1820, you can see the mentality of entitlement to the land was in full effect under President Andrew Jackson, who forced the Muskogee to sign the Treaty of Fort Jackson. The source for that is nps.gov, and give up living on 20 million acres of land in the Georgia region of the country in order to avoid total annihilation. In 1830, Andrew Jackson's signing of the Indian Removal Act directly led to the infamous series of forced removal of thousands of Native Americans from their land, often at gunpoint, in what is known as the Trail of Tears. Meanwhile, in the southwest region of the country, land grabs are taking place first in the form of the Louisiana Purchase that took place actually back in 1803, where, according to National Archives, the U.S. purchased 828,000 square miles of land from France for $15 million, or approximately 4 cents per acre. And then, in the form of starting a war with Mexico by invading them in April of 1845. After the war, they successfully annexed land that was originally Mexico and is now modern day Texas, California, New Mexico, Utah, Nevada, Arizona, and portions of Colorado, Oklahoma, Kansas, and Wyoming. Yay! In an agreement with Mexico that brought an end to the war in 1848, the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo was struck, which had the U.S. pay $15 million to Mexico and forgive about $3.3 million of debt owed by Mexico to U.S. citizens. And the source for that is wikipedia.com. Some years later, the U.S. passed the Indian Appropriations Act that created the Native American reservation system that spans to this day. Now that they were done with all that, on to the next conflict, the Civil War between the states that was triggered by a slew of southern states seceding from the Union and forming the Confederate States of America, due to their desire to keep slavery legislated by the states without federal government interfering, so they could keep slavery going. The Civil War concluded with the South losing, and while this was going on, the U.S. still had the time to continue their disputes with the indigenous populations. With the Chiricahua Apache tribe performing raids over the next decade into the 1860s, and Colorado volunteers attacking the Cheyenne and Arapaho communities and committing the Sand Creek Massacre of 1864. Over to Reconstruction era. After the Civil War, the war against indigenous continued on all fronts, now with seemingly more massacres being committed against defenseless tribe members, rather than warring with other warriors, outright disregard for any agreements previously made. 1868 to 1876 marked the era of General Custer and desecration of the sacred Black Hills that the Treaty of Fort Laramie had previously promised as the unquestioned territory of the Sioux. The moment gold was discovered there, the U.S. immediately disregarded that treaty and therefore took both the territory the Sioux agreed to surrender originally and the land that they were able to keep via the treaty. And as you can see, the complete takeover of the land by the U.S. continued on well into the early 1900s. The tide didn't really start to turn as far as the sentiment surrounding wiping out the indigenous Americans until World War I, and even more so after the civil rights movement of the 60s that brought about the Indian Civil Rights Act, which was put into law by President Lyndon Johnson in 1968. So this concludes the first lesson in our real estate and land use series. If you have any questions or any clarifications you need, feel free to post comments. Our next lesson, lesson 2, will be a continuation on historical context surrounding land use in the U.S. with a specific review of land distribution post-slavery and how horrific and violent anti-Black racism truly was. The lesson will cover the racial terrorism inflicted on African American communities that attempted to form, and how, in spite of Black Americans' incredible resilience in being able to secure land at all after centuries of being held in chattel slavery conditions, much less build peaceful and even wealthy Black enclaves that rivaled and often overtook neighboring white communities, there really was no hope in truly being able to thrive or be successful, or even in many cases stay alive at all, due to the relentless lynchings, massacres, complete lack of police or legal protection, and flagrantly racist property laws. Sections covered will include post-slavery and the building of Black communities, case study on Anthony Crawford, stick around for that one, Jim Crow laws and how it disenfranchised generations of Black people from their own land, and another case study in reference to the Gullah Geechee of South Carolina. So thank you very much, and I'll see you next time.